Well, again, Zach, thanks so much. And thank you to everyone out there for investing some time with us this morning. And like Zach stated, today's session is going to focus on Autosoft service quoting functionality. Now, for many dealerships, building an estimate can still be a very manual process that can involve multiple steps, several different people, and take a lot more time than it actually should. Our service quoting tool enables users to quickly build an all-inclusive estimate that can be emailed to a customer directly from Autosoft. And that estimate can then immediately be converted over to a brand new repair order or added to one that's already open. And of course, this eliminates having to recreate that repair order with the exact same information that was used to build the quote itself. It's also going to provide the customer with the most accurate information in regards to what it will cost to fix their vehicle. Let's take a walk through how this process works and how it can save some time for the dealership. First of all, you'll be able to access service quoting from the main service screen here. The quoting functionality, it's laid out in the exact same format as repair orders are, meaning a user can access a quote at any given stage throughout the process. Starting a quote works identical to starting a repair order within Autosoft. If I were wanting to do an internal quote on a vehicle owned by the dealership, I could start by inputting the stock number. If I'm doing this for a customer's vehicle, I could input the last date of the VIN right here, or I could go down to search and I could pull up that customer based on any of the information that you see. Again, just like you're starting a repair order. So in this case, we'll select our customer. And on the first screen, it's going to show all of my pertinent customer information and their vehicle information. If necessary, I can run my OEM history report. So for our Ford dealers, you can run your Oasis. For example, for your GM dealers, you can run your IVH. Verify any open recalls or things like that before you do the quote if necessary. And down here, you'll be able to see if there's a service contract currently on the vehicle. Now over here in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll be able to determine the type of quote that you're creating. So you can distinguish between a quote for the service department, body shop, or quick lane. And then in turn, if that quote ends up being enrolled into a repair order, it's going to dictate the type of repair order that gets created from the quote. Now on the second screen here is where all the job lines are added to the quote, just like you're doing for a repair order. So any of your pre-established service menu items or opcodes can easily be incorporated into any quote that you create. So for example, I'm going to start off by building a quote here for us, and I'm going to add some of my service menu items. So keep in mind too, anytime you add a service menu item that has parts associated with it, those parts are going to come over with that service menu item into the quoting tool. So you're going to have those associated parts included in your quote as well. Now, if you're using a labor time guide in your service department, such as ALLDATA or Identifix or Chilton's, you'll be able to pull up that information based on how you're accessing the labor time guide, whether it be through their software or on their website. And you'll be able to get the time that you've obtained from the labor time guide and incorporate it into a job line on your quote. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add a job line that would be coming from information I've gotten from my outside labor time guide. So in this case, we're going to fix the thermostat on this customer's vehicle. And of course, you can input the information in the 3 C's as you so choose. And then over here under the labor time is where you'll be able to take the time that you've obtained from your labor time guide and incorporate it here into the quote. So in this case, we're going to say that this is an 1.5-hour job. And then my sale amount's going to calculate based on the time and also the labor level associated with the job. Now, your labor levels can be set up within your service settings, and you can ensure that the proper labor levels are being used whenever you're adding job lines to your quotes. So we're going to go ahead and save that job to the quote here. And one of the other things that I did want to highlight here is that for any dealers that are currently using Mitchell, we have integration with Autosoft to where we can pull labor time and parts information from Mitchell into Autosoft. So if we want to do that, we'll click on this button, and that's going to take the VIN of the vehicle to Mitchell's outside service quoting website. And the VIN's automatically going to be decoded here. And this is where I'll be able to search the labor and parts components of the job that I want to quote. So I can either utilize the search bar up here, or I can access via the categories. So in this case, if I wanted to replace the master cylinder in this truck, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the labor. And I can see in this case, it's a 2-hour job, and that job can be performed by a B-level technician. So we can go ahead and add that to our quote. And Mitchell also provides OEM part number information. And being that Mitchell has the VIN of the vehicle, they can ensure that the proper parts are being used for that repair. And anytime you see a blue link here on your part number, you can click on it, and it'll actually take you into a diagram for the part. So you can blow that up. You can print it right from this screen. And the pricing that you see here, that pricing comes from Mitchell, and they get it from the OEM list price found on the parts table. Now, if your dealership has a pricing matrix set up within your parts department, your parts pricing can override the Mitchell pricing. That way, whenever you're issuing a quote to a customer, you can ensure that the dealership's pricing parameters are being used. We'll go ahead and we'll add the part. And now we'll bring everything back from Mitchell into Autosoft. So now we have our job line here that came over from Mitchell. We can add any other additional information that we may want to include here within the story at this time. The labor time came over. I can adjust this if necessary. So if I do need to go in and adjust the time, maybe my technician's going to run into some rusty bolts or something, I can go ahead and I can update the time and save the job line. So the beauty of our quoting tool is whether or not you incorporate the integration with Mitchell, you're still going to be able to build a full-fledged quote within Autosoft. And then as you'll see, you'll actually be able to take that quote and create a brand new repair order from. On the next screen, this is where any parts can be added to the quote. And like I mentioned before, any parts that are associated with service menu items, those are automatically going to come over into this section. So if you have those parts listed within your service menu items, they're going to appear right here. You can see that they're associated with the proper job line, and you can also see that you currently have that part on hand in your inventory. Any parts that are brought over from Mitchell, again, they're going to be associated with the proper job line, and you can also see that you currently have that part on hand in inventory. The pricing, again, that's defaulted based on what comes over from Mitchell. But if you do have a pricing matrix set up, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select the part line, and you're going to want to tab over, and then that's going to adjust the pricing to reflect the dealership's parts pricing. So now I can go ahead and I can add that part to the quote. Another thing to keep in mind, any parts that get added to quotes here within service, those parts are not relieved from your on-hand quantity in inventory. So at this point in time, we haven't actually sold any parts. We're just simply adding them to the quote to be able to provide the information. So we're not actually taking any parts out of inventory at this point yet. On the next screen, this is where I would be able to incorporate any sort of sublets or bulk fluids that I may need to include within that repair order, or I'm sorry, within that quote. And I said that just because it works exactly the same. The screen's identical to what you would see in your repair order screen. And then the final screen is where you're going to be able to email that quote right to the customer. So whenever I click this button, that is going to send an emailed copy of the quote in PDF to that customer. So they'll have their quote. You can, of course, physically print the quote, and just like everything else within Autosoft, it's going to initially print to PDF. So if you did want to save a copy of it to a file on your computer, you can certainly do that. This is how the quote's going to appear. And like I mentioned before, Autosoft generates a full out the door quote for the customer. So that encompasses everything as far as labor, parts, shop supplies, even taxes. So all of that's factored into the quote that's generated for the customer, so they know exactly what they need to spend in order to repair their vehicle. Now, you can also dictate within the settings how long that quote is going to be valid for based on whatever your shop's policy is. So you can have that information display here on the quote. You can also have this quote watermark display on the quote as well whenever that's given to a customer. Now, at this point in time, depending upon what you're wanting to do with that quote, you can take it and you can dump it to a brand new repair order, or you can roll it to a repair order that may already be open for that customer. So it would take those job lines and add them to the next available job lines on the repair order. So again, the whole idea is that it prevents you from having to re-enter all of that information that you just input into the quoting tool whenever you go to ultimately create your repair order. So it's going to save a lot of time for everyone building quotes and creating repair orders at the dealership. Now, let's just say we've created our quote for Charlie. We email it to him. He calls us back later in a couple days and tells us he wants to move forward with the work. Like I mentioned before, I can jump into the quoting process at any given point here from the main service quoting screen. So if I go right to review and print, I can come down to my quote list. I can access Charlie's quote right from here. We're going to store the quotes in Autosoft for you for up to 90 days. So as long as you would realistically need to access that quote, it'll be available to you here. So you'll then be able to select the quote and you'll be able to dump it to either a brand new or an existing repair order. So when I click on new in this case, it's going to tell me that that quote was dumped to RO 84313. And then when I click OK, it takes me right into the repair order that was created for that customer. So again, all of that information that was incorporated in the quote is going to flow through into the RO. So when I go to the next screen, under my enter condition screen, I'm going to see everything that was included into the quote has already rolled over into my repair order form. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention when we are in the quoting tool, for any customer that may be set up as a special service customer that has a parts or service discount associated with their profile, those discounts can automatically be applied whenever a quote's being generated for that customer. You can also apply discounts just like you do for your repair orders to any quote that gets issued from the quoting tool. So this concludes today's presentation of Autosoft Service Quoting Module. Again, thank you so much for your time with us this morning. It's been my pleasure to share this information with you. And now I'll turn the session back over to Zach, who can open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Very informative. Well, now, is there any additional questions from those on the webinar? You can either type them into the chat or use the raise hand button, and I will unmute your line so you can ask a question. Michael, we did have one come in where an Autosoft user says they don't think they have the option to select Pro or All Data. Is that the case for some Autosoft users, or should we get offline with her and get that information to her?
Well, the only labor time guide that Autosoft currently integrates with is Mitchell Pro Demand. So if you don't see that Pro Demand button at the bottom of your quoting tool, you don't have the Mitchell integration set up. That's something that I believe Zach shared a link in the chat. If you are interested in learning more about Mitchell, you can just provide some basic contact information and they'll reach out to you.
Perfect. And how do you save the quote? Can you go back and show how that quote is actually saved in the system?
So what's nice is as soon as you start creating the quote, as soon as you've started that quote and you've added either labor or parts, it's automatically going to save it. So for some reason, if you do need to walk away from your desk and you get out of the service quoting screen, you can always go right back and pick up where you left off. It's not as though it's going to cause you to lose your work.
Perfect. And is it possible to see other service advisors' quotes? Is this an all-encompassing quote list for every service advisor in the dealership?
That's a very good question. That's something that I will have to take to one of our fixed ops experts to see whether or not the quotes are accessible to everyone, or you're only going to see the ones that you've created. Let's take a note on that.
Okay. And another question that came in is, does it pull parts over to the new RO if the part is not in stock?
So what it'll do in that case is it will pull the part over to the repair order and it will preload it on the part side. And depending upon how you handle parts that aren't stocked into inventory, whether you go into negative on hand and you're willing to sell a part to a repair order that's not in your inventory and then just simply order it to set it to zero, you can do that. When the parts come over from any quote that gets pushed over from the quoting tool into service, just to show you how that looks, is at that point in time, the parts have not yet been sold to the repair order. So what parts is going to do on their end is, in working with Charlie's our quote that we pushed over, if we go into line parts here and we pull up the repair order for Charlie, what I'm still going to have to do at this point is officially sell those parts to the repair order. So I would tap through just like I would be selling any other part to the repair order. It's preloaded the information for me based on what came over from the quote, but I still have to go in and officially add those parts to the repair order. And at that point in time, then it's going to take them out of inventory.
Perfect. There's another question that came in asking if you can show again where that Mitchell link is, that pro demand link.
Yes. So the button you
It
will
may be
see.
that you can't see your mouse very well, so just maybe circle that very easily
Sure.
on there.
No problem. Let's go back into the quoting tool. And where it'll appear is when you go into your start quote screen. And I'm just going to pick on Charlie's quote's gone because we converted it to a repair order. So let's just go ahead and we'll start another quote. So on the next screen, under your essentially what appears to be your enter condition screen in the repair order. So whenever you're adding your job lines to the quote, whatever you want it to contain, this is where you'll find the button. So you'll see it down in the bottom left-hand column. So you'll see the pro demand right there. And of course, any quote that gets created out of the quoting tool, whether or not you have pro demand. So if you are using the quoting tool and you're simply adding your own items, whether it comes from another labor time guide or whether you're just using your own service menu items and you're building the quotes with those, you can take those quotes that you've created and you can convert them right into a repair order. So that happens on the very last screen where you're able to take the quote and dump it either to a brand new repair order or you can add it to an open RO.
Perfect. Hopefully that answered Michael's question there. Another question that came in is we have a dealer that's using Mitchell's shop key. Will that work?
It's a good question. That's something else I'm going to take offline and we'll find out and see if that's something that can work for you as well.
Okay. We'll get back to Fred on that question then. Another one that came in, can it pull the quote over to an existing RO?
Yes, absolutely. So you have that option on the very last screen. Yep. So on the very last screen where you would go to email your quote over to the customer, you have the option here to either dump that to a new repair order. So it's going to create a brand new repair order, just like we did when we worked through Charlie's quote, or you can dump it to an RO that's already open for that customer. So if you already have an RO open, you can take the information that you've created with the quote and just roll it into that open RO, and everything functions the same.
We had a helpful tip come in from Patrick. He said that at their dealership, all quotes written by all service advisors are seen by all advisors.
Excellent. And that's a great, thank you for answering that for us, Patrick. And I don't know whether that's a setting that is universal or if that can be controlled by each individual dealership.
Yeah, so Jasmine, as you asked that question about seeing other advisors' quotes, go ahead and look in there. Have other advisors, enter in quotes and see if they can all be seen by each other. If that is a setting, our client support team will gladly help you set that up, and we'll give their information at the end of the webinar here. I had another question come in about adding things like brake fluid, coolant, or oil when using Mitchell. When quoting on Mitchell, they normally don't include the fluids or the gaskets or the hardware. How would they be able to add those to the quote without knowing the part number?
So as far as bulk fluids, you can add bulk fluids on this screen here as far as where you would go to add any bulk fluids to a repair order. Same place where you would go to add any sublets. Within Mitchell, you can look up fluid capacity. It's just not going to bring that information from Mitchell into Autosoft. The only thing that would come over is the labor time and the parts information. But if you are adding bulk fluids, that can be done right here. As far as part numbers, you don't need to actually use specific part numbers whenever you're creating a quote if you don't have them at the time. So anytime, of course, that you use a part number that is coming off of one of the parts tapes that you have set up within Autosoft, it's going to bring that information in, whether or not you have that part in stock. So it will display the part number information anytime you enter it here. But if you don't have it, or you're just going to use something as a point of reference, you can certainly do that. And you can add a description as far as what that part is going to be. And then, of course, you can update it with the real information if you choose whenever you do get it from the part provider.
Wonderful. We have a question coming from Kip. If they already have Pro Demand, how do they make that interaction work? Who should they reach out to? Is that their client success manager or customer support?
Client success
client success.
To facilitate getting that set up for you.
Okay, perfect. And once again, I'll have that information at the conclusion of this webinar so that you can get a hold, at least with the director of our client success team. If you already know your representative's name and phone number, you can reach out to them directly. Had a question come in. How does it roll the quote on an RO that is already open? And you are quote for the original customer complaint and no ads?
So as far as adding the quote to an open RO, that's handled through the final screen where you have the option here of either creating a brand new repair order or adding it to the open repair order through the active button. So if you click on that active button, it would give you a list of the open ROs, and then you would just be able to select your customer's repair order, and it would push those items to that already open repair order. And so if that open repair order has 2 job lines on it, then your first line on your quoted job would be job line 3. So job line 1 on your quote would be job line 3 on your repair order.
And so would that just add more lines?
Yes, it will. So like if you have, for example, a 5-line quote that we've created for Charlie, and you have a 2-line repair order already open for them, you'll now have a 7-line repair order, because it's just going to bring that quote over, and it's going to add those additional job lines from the quote to the repair order.
Right. Can the parts department see the quote to add parts to the quote?
Yes, they can. So that is a great question. And parts is able to access those service quotes through the query screen. So on the part side, whenever you go to the query screen and you build a list of parts, and as you know, you can take that list of parts and you can dump it to wherever it needs to go. One of the areas that you can dump that list of parts to is to a service quote. So again, regardless of Mitchell integration, this is where you can come in and you can take a list of parts that you've generated here in the parts department. And when you click that button, it's going to give you all of the quotes that have been created here in service. So if I wanted to take that list of parts and dump it to my service quote, I could do that. And so then it would allow me to add those quotes, or I'm sorry, add those parts to that quote.
Perfect. There was another question that came in. You mentioned that the quote goes away after 90 days. Create a new one after 90 days, or does it go into an archive?
I believe you would need to create a new quote after that 90-day period. But again, that's something that I can verify with our fixed ops specialists.
Wonderful. These are all great questions. Please have them keep coming in. We'd love to help. And if there happens to be a question that I did not see, either paste it again in the chat function or just raise your hand and we'll unmute your line and you can ask it. I think I've got to all of them, but here's another one that came in. Is there a limit to the number of lines that can be added?
On a quote, that's not something I would have to get you an answer on that. But just keep in mind, within a repair order, you can have 12 job lines per repair order.
Okay, we'll get back to Michael on that then. Any others? These are great. Another one came in. Do we have to set up to email or text the quotes to the customer for review on Autosoft?
Well, you can email the quote. You cannot text it directly from Autosoft, but you can email. You're just going to want to make sure before you create the quote that that customer has a valid email address. If they don't have an email address associated with their profile, you can add it whenever you are creating the quote. So for example, if I go and I want to create a quote and I click on search to pull up a customer, if they have an email address already affiliated, that's going to show right here in the email field. If they don't, you can simply input it. And then once you reach that final screen, it will send the email PDF copy of that quote to that customer's email.